Hello guys, welcome back to a brand new video. Today, a YouTuber known as Sonic Theory has made a video about Sonic's villains and why they are struggling. Now, while I think that the video is good and all the points he brings up are valid, a problem that I have consistently in, well, almost every aspect is that he doesn't bring up how Sonic and Eggman are pretty much antonyms to each other, and introducing new dynamics to that will make it to where that character gets outshined by both Eggman and Sonic every single time. Anyway, let's get into the video, thank you.
Something has been holding the Sonic franchise back, limiting its potential to be a great franchise and instead stagnating to where it is now, which is still a pretty good one. But Sonic deserves so much better, and with this year being the franchise's 35th anniversary, the problem has only become more glaring despite there being a simple fix.
Eggman is the shadow of the villains team. What do I mean? You will sell an extra 1 million copies if you put both Shadow and Sonic in a game, and you will also get an extra million copies if you put Eggman and Sonic in a game. So putting these three characters all in the same story is gonna at least guarantee you 3 million copies. And I don't know if they want to sacrifice one of those 3 million copies without either putting Shadow in there or without putting Eggman in there. So, you know, they're willing to waste it and take a 2 million copy game, but they aren't willing to give it a 1 million copy game. You're going to need that villain who comes in and he steals the show whenever he's on screen in order to get anything past Eggman. The only villain I can see doing that is Sage by herself, Metal Sonic breaking away from Eggman, or Zavok. Zavok has so many cool ways of interacting with the world that'll make him unique from any other character. But you know, we gotta let him keep talking.
See, Sonic has a massive problem when it comes to the villain department. Outside of Eggman and Metal Sonic, there aren't any villains in his rogues gallery that are instantly recognizable for being great antagonists. And what I mean by this is Sonic lacks any villains who have depth outside of a singular appearance. This series has come a long way, and it's evolved beyond just being entertaining video games. It's shows, movies, and comics. Yet despite all these forms of medium, the only memorable villain after 35 years of existence is a fat, bald, middle-aged man.
Actually, I disagree with this. I think every villain that's connected to Dr. Eggman is instantly recognizable. There's a reason why the 2D games villains aren't as well known as the 3D games villains, because they're harder to connect to Eggman if you don't see him do it. But you know who Zavok is because of his connection to Sonic. You know who Mephiles is because of his connection to Eggman. You know who Perfect Chaos is because of his connection to Eggman. You know who Mephiles is because of his connection to Eggman, and all that stuff. So when you say a villain isn't recognizable, I disagree with that, because you can show pretty much anybody a picture of almost every Sonic villain and they will know who it is, but they aren't interesting enough to keep around.
Now, I can already hear the typing because those of us who are a little more invested in the franchise might like characters like Mephiles or Chaos or perhaps even Dr. Starline, but none of those are characters that were enabled to make a lasting impact on the franchise. It's a
No, pretty much all these characters have left a lasting impact on the franchise. They don't leave any cultural impact though. That is what you're actually looking for. You're looking for a villain not who has a lasting impact on the franchise itself. It definitely has a franchise impact itself. Pretty much all the casuals know all these villains, but you're looking for villains who can create cultural impact so they get beyond their one-time mention status. And let's be clear, Zavok is kind of reaching that impact status, but the issue is that a lot of people don't understand his character enough to attempt to push him. Because Zavok was never written poorly, he was just in a game where everyone else around him was written poorly, so his character didn't shine as much as it could have.
as if Sega is too scared to take a chance on any other villain aside from Eggman, and by not doing so, they might be damaging the franchise in the long run. As one of the most recent games, I think Sonic Superstars highlights a major flaw when it comes to Sonic villains. Oftentimes, it's not apparent what the antagonist's ambitions or motives are. While Fang and Eggman service the story well enough, the true endgame villain is revealed after completing Trip's campaign, and it's none other than the Black Dragon who was teased during the Trio of Troubleshort. If you're asking yourself, who? You're not alone, as his inclusion feels like he was randomly shoehorned in at the very last second to heighten the stakes, but it ultimately cheapens the experience as it feels wholly disconnected from the story.
I completely disagree. I believe that the Black Onyx foreshadowing was obviously leading to something being discovered. I just think that there not being any words in classic Sonic games leads to a lot of explaining not happening, and so you have these issues where there's cognitive dissonance between what's being explained and what's being viewed in the background. Because you can tell this by the fact that nobody actually talks about the issues with Sonic Superstar's story. They just say that it feels like it comes out of nowhere, because almost every single thing in a classic Sonic game is environmental storytelling, which is why they stick to Eggman so hard.
Where did he come from? Who is he? Why is he attacking the North Star Islands? These questions go entirely unanswered, and while I do find enjoyment in theorizing about such things, it doesn't excuse the lack of explanation.
Classic Sonic games are supposed to be about the adventure, so even spending time criticizing a classic Sonic game for not explaining things is a waste of time. It inherently is, because you never should expect a classic Sonic game to explicitly explain something to you. Now, you can put cave art on the walls, maybe, but there's not even a good chance that people will explain the cave art. It's about the characters in the story, not the story itself. The Black Dragon is a character arc resolver, not a character arc, not a character. He is so there to explicitly solve somebody else's problems. I'm going to be skipping the next part because it's about Far Cry and Resident Evil 4, and I don't play those games. I play Dead Space because I'm goated like that. So yeah, we're skipping to the part where he gets back to Sonic.
Is one that's recurring in the franchise. Eggman is almost always a part of these games, whether he's the focal point or playing a supporting role. While I love the character and usually want to see what scheme he is cooking up, his constant inclusion detracts from any new villains being introduced alongside him.
The problem with this is that you're either going to have a counterpoint to Eggman or Sonic. Sonic has the rivals for all his counterpoints. There is not a villain who fits the role of a counterpoint, because the only counterpoint to Sonic on the villain side, if we're being completely real, is the idea that Eggman cares a lot more about technology, right? Because you can either have far apart stagnations where you have someone who's completely disconnected and disaligned with your ideals, or you can have people with similar ideals who disagree on how you should do it, or the other one who they disagree on the moral philosophy, but they have a comparative structure of how they run their lives. But Sonic has this problem where everyone who agrees with his moral stance but goes around it from a different angle is going to be a rival who eventually joins the good team, because Eggman is so much worse. So if Eggman wasn't as bad, a lot of Sonic's rivals could still stay antagonists, but Eggman is too bad of a person in order for them to stay. So you're going to have to take another character who comes from that third category where they have the same style of philosophy but a different temperament, and they believe in the villainous aspect, and push them. And the only character who truly fits that definition is Zavok, because you can't go to the other side where they disalign and they're disanalogous to everything, because they will be compared to Eggman.
Understandably, most of these characters are created or used by Eggman to further his goals, but I do think that some of these characters could have benefited from Eggman either being excluded from the game entirely or making him less relevant to the plot. And here's why. Eggman is a great villain. He's Sonic's arch nemesis for a reason, but more than that, he's the antithesis to everything Sonic stands for. We know Sonic is about freedom, nature, and speed, while Eggman represents control, technology, and laziness.
Eggman is too much of a stark contrast because Sonic does not have a character arc. They aren't ever challenging Sonic as a character, so Sonic cannot have any new villains without those new villains being connected to a different character. So if Sonic were to grow into a different character over time, then you can release and use new villains who actually counter him at that time, which is why a lot of Sonic villains inside of things like the Archie comics can be disconnected from Sonic because he has villains who can be used at specific points in his development in order to increase his actual usefulness as a character and increase how well his character growth is perceived. And in fact, I would say the second most popular villain in the Sonic franchise is Black Doom, and Black Doom is not connected to Sonic in any way whatsoever. So when people don't talk about Black Doom in these conversations, it kind of gives me a side eye, because I know that you mean you want more villains who are connected to Sonic, but you can't create new connections to Sonic without Sonic having character growth, because those connections feel hollow and can just be filled by Eggman.
With how Eggman stands as a stark contrast to Sonic, it only makes sense that he's in a majority of the media. However, with Eggman being the defining villain in the franchise, there hasn't been a lot of room for others to make their mark, and instead they feel as if they're footnotes in Eggman's conquest. Just about every villain is connected to Eggman in some way. Infinite served under him, Mephiles was freed by him, Starline worshipped him, and I could go on much longer with the list, but I think you guys get the point. What this ultimately means is that no original villain is allowed to stand on their own, which is a disservice to the franchise because they will always be in the shadow of Eggman. Infinite showed promise, his design was menacing and mysterious. He had unparalleled power, but ultimately fell flat when it came to the depiction of his story. This poor character portrayal is only exacerbated by the fact that he was relegated to a backseat role because, of course, the main villain needed to be Eggman for some reason. Don't get me wrong.
Another thing that I want to say about Infinite is that Infinite is one of the few characters that can genuinely despise Eggman after his first appearance, right next to Zavok, because those two characters have been betrayed by Zavok in a way that actually fuels their character motivations. Infinite does not like feeling weak. If Infinite gets called back to a facility and gets trapped inside of the Phantom Ruby, or whatever we think actually happened to him, he will not work with Eggman because Eggman made him feel weak. He would try to destroy Eggman, and Zavok was controlled by Eggman, but he cannot control Eggman himself, so he controls his robots and uses it to try to control Eggman that way.
It's entertaining seeing Eggman finally conquer the world, but why not write a story around this new character and his shocking rise to power? Spending more time developing Infinite's story by omitting Eggman from the plot could have been an improvement on the game as a whole, and maybe would have left Sonic fans with a new villain to be excited about, rather than the one that they tried to forget. The Zetti fare no better. In a game that should seemingly revolve around these mythic creatures from the Lost Hex, they are instead relegated to Eggman-controlled minions for a good portion of the runtime. Luckily, the comics were able to give agency to these characters when they sought revenge on Eggman, but I still question why the plot of that game needed to revolve around him instead of solely being about the Zetti.
The reason why Eggman needed to be there, which is a very stupid reason, is because they made the Zetti tech savvy, but they live on a desolate wasteland. Like, if you look at that game itself, the Zetti are able to use machines in pretty cool ways, especially with that plan with turning Tails into a cyborg. That was really, really cool. But the issue is that they lived on a desolate wasteland, so you needed Eggman to be there to bring their forces to them. And I'm just sitting there like, what were they doing with their abilities beforehand? What were they doing with their abilities beforehand? How do you know you even have those abilities at that point? It doesn't make any sense.
We're already dealing with a huge cast of distinct villains, so the more prominence that they get, the more we understand their motivations and come to like the characters or even hate them in a good way. I can also imagine a version of Sonic 06 being received better if you removed Eggman from the game until the very end. This would keep the narrative focus on Mephiles and Iblis, while the hero's journey to stop these two from merging once again to become the all-powerful Solaris. Then, at the very end, the heroes would have to seek the aid of their old nemesis Eggman in order to save the day. But instead, Eggman is a persistent obstacle in the game, because it feels like the story team is too scared to make a game where he's removed from the plot and the full attention is on another villain.
It's partially that, but it's also because any good villain that you're going to make past Eggman needs to be directly connected to another character for us to care. Sonic is going to have to intervene in that plot and then fight the villain himself, but the other characters have to be the main focus because those are the characters with the character arcs. Sonic does not have a character arc, so Eggman completely fits all of his character needs because he's not evolving.
Even in a game like Sonic Frontiers, where Eggman isn't the central focus, he still has to be involved somehow, and this is actually my favorite Eggman appearance due to his dynamic with Sage. But it feels like taking a game to step away from him entirely and to let another villain shine would really benefit the series as a whole by making things feel fresh.
Let's make this insanely clear, okay? I do not think that this would work in any capacity because Eggman is too much of a perfect villain for Sonic the Hedgehog. He is. He's just too much of a perfect villain for Sonic the Hedgehog. You don't need anybody else to come in there because of how static Sonic is and how dynamic Eggman is. Eggman can fit almost any role in any story that involves Sonic.
Even if you look outside of the games and at the Sonic movies, all three films have Jim Carrey's Robotnik center stage as the villain, with a minor twist of his redemption in the third. And now it seems like he will possibly return in the fourth alongside Metal Sonic as a villain again. At times, his inclusion starts to feel so forced that other characters become less and less noticeable. And once you start to view it from that perspective, you begin to realize just how few good villains there really are. Unfortunately, when it comes,
despite what people say, there are two pretty good villains in Sonic, Black Doom and Zavok. These two characters are really fun, they're really cool, and they do things that Eggman doesn't.
To interesting villains that would be able to carry a game on their own, many of them have already been defeated in a way that would make it hard for them to return or have ultimately been killed off. Characters that come to mind are the likes of Starline, who was so interesting for his capability to recognize that Eggman and Sonic were stuck in a never-ending battle, which he deemed the Sonic cycle. Starline wanted to not only impress Eggman, but surpass him in every way, but it seems as though he met his demise. However, the jury is still out on that one.
The problem with Starline is that Sonic doesn't evolve, Eggman doesn't evolve, so focusing on the Sonic cycle is the worst thing you could do ever, because it will not change no matter what. This is because Sonic and Eggman are static characters. You cannot change these two characters in any way whatsoever. So Starline instantly becomes less interesting as a character for that reason.
Mimic as well was a very intriguing character from the comics, seeing as he was a shapeshifter who betrayed his team, which led to their deaths. He was pretty compelling as a lone wolf who hated other villains and heroes alike. The only problem with his character is that he was a coward, akin to that of General Grievous from the Clone Wars series, but the character was still fun before he seemingly died. I don't know if he necessarily could pull the weight of being the main title villain, but perhaps for a spin-off game.
Let's be real, Mimic would only really work in a horror game. I'm just saying it. I'm saying it right now. Mimic would only work in a horror game, and they're not gonna go that far. Mark my words. Mark my words.
Another character I believe people would want to see as a main villain is Mephiles. He did the unbelievable and escaped Sonic 06 purgatory, but his time in the sun was fleeting, as Shadow easily defeated him and he was once again lost to time and space.
Mephiles is a Shadow villain first and foremost. He is not a Sonic villain. Put him in a story with him and just Sonic, you will not get the same experience between putting him versus Shadow, because he's a counterpoint to Shadow, because Sonic is a static character who doesn't change, so there's only value to letting him fight against Eggman.
A lot of characters that are still around aren't really major threats to Sonic. Rough and Tumble bumble around like a pair of idiots. They're fun additions to the villain roster, don't get me wrong, but they'll never be more than henchmen. Clutch, the last time we saw him, has become a victim of Eggman, once more adding to the fact that every villain, of course, has to have some dynamic or encounter with him. Surge and Kit could be great villains to introduce in a game or show, seeing as they're like twisted dark versions of Sonic and Tails, but they almost seem to be on the path of redemption. Who knows how smoothly that will go? It could end up flipping on its head and they become more evil than before. But a lot of Sonic's villains wind up becoming his allies, which is something that I do enjoy, but when the writers aren't introducing cool new villains at a pace to match, we start to dwindle on intriguing foes for the blue blur. And
he's an adventurer who has freedom in the wind. The only ways you can really counter that is by taking one of those core traits and reversing them, and Eggman reverses all of them all at once. So you're going to have to make villains who are counterpoints to other characters, which is going to make them less interesting as Sonic villains and make them more interesting as everyone else villains.
This leads us to another problem that I didn't even notice until a comment brought it to my attention. A lot of the new villains being introduced recently are all thieves. There are so many different archetypes for villains, yet Valdis, Enigma, Lunar, whoever the thief is in the Chaotix case files is revealed to be, they're all thieves. For the stories to stay fresh, the villains and their motives should theoretically be more diverse, so that every story isn't just Sonic and his friends need to stop X person from stealing Y item. We should be getting villains aside from Eggman who mentally want to break Sonic, or hold a grudge against Sonic for not being there when Eggman conquered the world during Sonic Forces. The state things are currently in just feels as if Eggman will forever be the character who is allowed to do cool things like summon eldritch horrors from another dimension or ancient gods beneath the Earth's crust.
Oh my god, I found the easiest thing to create a new villain. Make a character that wants to put everyone in jail. Easy. Easy. Sonic is a character who wants to move around. Make a character like the turtle from The Flash. I think I just cracked the code. Make him want everyone to go slow, and he has the power to make everyone go slow. And just make his backstory the idea that if you're too fast, you're able to commit crimes with impunity and do morally bad things with impunity, right? You don't have to be explicitly a villain, you just have to do things that other people perceive as villainous in their circumstances. Sonic wants to be fast, Sonic wants to move around, so you make a villain who just wants Sonic to be slower.
Let's get some new villains in on the action so that when they inevitably cross paths with our heroes again, it's a welcome surprise. I'm not the most well versed when it comes to Archie Sonic, but it seems like a lot of villains in that run were able to really hold their own weight when it came to being staple villains without needing to rely on Eggman propping them up. I really love and appreciate this series, and part of what makes it fun is all of the villains, but I do think it benefits the audience if we start getting fresh new villains who are as important as Eggman.
And the only way you're going to be able to do that is by not making them Sonic villains, but making them villains to other characters in your story. Because Sonic doesn't change, he doesn't evolve. And I'm just repeating myself. Fuck.
I'm not saying toss Eggman aside, but who wants to see Superman only fight Lex Luthor, right? We need staple characters making the rounds and doing their own things. Clutch for a while was actually a good step in that direction for the comics. He was building his own criminal empire, and he clearly had a disdain for Eggman. It just felt cool seeing another villain coexist in that world. But obviously, that didn't last. However, with exciting projects around the corner, who knows what's in store? I would love to hear what you guys think about the state of Sonic villains.
Yeah, but this video is really good. I really like what he said. I just think that the issues that he brings up are downstream from the fact that Eggman and Sonic are two of the most dynamically against each other characters of all time. I do not think there's any room for new characters in their relationship because they fulfill each other's goals. They do something that's very rare in this space, very rare in video games, where they completely have antonyms to each other. Eggman is an antonym to Sonic in almost every way, so there's not very many things to actually go off of. The only things that Eggman doesn't do is, one, he doesn't deal in magic, so you can go through that angle. He also is a futurist, just like Sonic, so you can focus on characters wanting to go back to a simpler time, but that leads to a whole bunch of problems where people want you to cover conservatism and all that stuff, which I'm down for, but a lot of people aren't. And then you'll have another thing where Eggman and Sonic are on opposites of spectrums of where you should let in like a lot of friends and constantly make friends, and you shouldn't care about people, and you can go down the middle roads of a lot of their ideologies, but then they end up being villains to both Eggman and Sonic, and with those two characters together, they get outshined completely. But hopefully you see my point of view when I'm saying, what I'm trying to get you to understand. Like, sub, comment, thank you for watching the video, have a great day.